Hello, YouTube. Just thought I'd make a video rant of sorts. Kind of about the state of Kentucky, which is where I live. The politics and laws, the stupidness and the backwardness and the religiousness and not sure if this would be called Fuck Kentucky or I'm Sick of Kentucky, or I'll probably censor the cuss word, but anyway. We're definitely totally dominated by the right-wing evangelical Christian theocratic Republicans who seem to look at Pakistan as the inspirational blueprint for political and economic policy and social relations. Strong authoritarian subjugation of women, of course, and anti-gay, anti-trans and all that, but very little in the way of government services, funding, things like education and wealth inequality and healthcare. Our state is always in the bottom, near bottom of the list, and all these markers comparing various outcomes of states. I mean, the best you can say is, well, at least we're better than Mississippi. Which I think is the absolute bottom, but Kentucky is definitely only slightly above Mississippi and Alabama. Of course, with the Supreme Catholic Moolah Court overturning Roe v. Wade, Kentucky immediately had trigger bans and instituted the near total extreme, most strict abortion criminalization in the country, or one of the most. And then puts restrictions on doctors for prescribing the medication, abortion, abortifacient, the mifepristone and misoprostol, which now Walgreens is not selling because of the state laws and trying to have parental consent with minors, and yeah, it's really big with these religious conservatives. If their parental authority, parental rights, parental dominance over all areas of the child's lives. Of course, that includes their bodily autonomy and sex lives when they're teenagers, I guess. I have very little respect for parents in general, but especially these ultra-conservative Christian parents who use authoritarian parenting methods and want near totalitarian insular control over their child or young adolescent or teenager's life, totally suffocating them and restricting them from anything but well, Bible classes. And to have the parents be in control of something like pregnancy and birth, force a teenager, 14, 15, 16-year-old, who's already more at risk, has a smaller body, smaller hips, to go through this excruciating, torturous, grueling process because of your sacred fables about infusions of the soul at conception. Is just anathema. To me, there's a point that I'm very skeptical of the whole parental rights ideal anyway, when it comes to like religious indoctrination and forcing kids to go to church and all this stuff. And I think religious indoctrination and religious school should basically be illegal personally, but there should be a certain age, like 15, 16, when you're allowed to reveal, or they're allowed to decide on their own when they have enough critical, independent thinking capacity to possibly have any real say in this matter of belief. In gods or whatever supernatural, spiritual notions. toxic and abusive and traumatizing. So, parents forcing the girls to give birth, I mean, I'm sorry, no, you lose all so-called authority, whatever guardianship abilities you have. This is also a person who has their own mind, their own lives, their own identity. They're not a extension of yourself. They're not your property. So no, you do not have these unequivocal, enshrined rights over their body in such an extreme way. But, yeah, I just totally lose all respect, any little bit I may have, for these sadistic, Nazi parents, and they should truly just lose all rights to custody at that point. And, I have no problem saying that they're abusive, tyrannical, unloving pieces of horseshit. No pun intended, because Kentucky is this state of horses. But yeah, we have this notion that the parent is always right. The parent makes all the choices and decisions. The parent should have control over what they watch and what they read. We can't intrude on the parents' rights. Why we intrude on the parents' rights when they're, at some point, they've made themselves, they lose their rights, whether it's cases of severe abuse, malnourishment, neglect. They're drug users and they have fentanyl and meth strewn across the Section 8 apartments. For some reason, these Republicans still want all these super poor people, including those addicted to drugs, breeding and irresponsibly throwing kids into these shacks where they end up being taken away by Child Protective Services eventually, and just causing not just more suffering for the child, but just more economic resources will be needed for all these extra cases of abuse and for the foster care system and juvenile delinquency and detention centers and welfare and food stamps and all this stuff that on the flip side they're totally ideologically against all forms of assistance and welfare and benefits and entitlements. And what have you. And this is a poorer state. It is. We have just lots of rural poverty, lots of urban poverty in Louisville. And your grand solution? Let's force them to reproduce more. It's like, what? What about the gun violence? What about the homicide rate that's reaching Chicago levels, surpassing Chicago even, here in Louisville? Nope, more babies. Even if we have to dump them in the baby boxes that we're setting up all over the place. God. Well, we do have exemptions for medical emergency and direct threat to the mother's life and all that, but the way they word it is so weird. It's like the woman has to be literally bleeding out and dying right then, and only then will an abortion be allowed. Yeah, when you actually look into the wording of the bill and of laws, and it always prioritizes almost and elevates the fetus. That's who you should save, not the mother, if you have to save one. A lot of the pro-lifers will go that far. But to address that whole argument, I would just say that let's just get this biological medical fact straight. Every pregnancy is a direct threat and endanger, potential risk to the mother. All pregnancy. All leads to harm to the body, disfigurement possible, pain, suffering with birth, various nausea, vomiting, and in some cases you can get the extreme, just unrelenting nausea that's unlike regular, just typical morning sickness, but this is called hyperemesis gravidarum, I think, and truly awful to have. And then there's gestational diabetes and hypertension, preeclampsia, rectal prolapses, rectal cell, pelvic congestion syndrome, pelvic floor dysfunction and spasms and tears of the perineum, needing to have episiotomies when giving vaginal birth. C-section is a major it's major surgery. It's cutting open layers of your abdomen through the muscles, the tendons, to rip out this baby. And you can just go on and on listing the negative health and well-being consequences of pregnancy and childbirth. Breaking your tailbone, going into heart failure. My own great-great-grandmother, died giving birth to her third child. This was back in the 40s. She bled out, hemorrhaged. There was probably uterine rupture. And now that we know that this Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, this disorder affecting the body's connective tissue, which close members of my family have, and I have a gene for, and it comes through this lineage of my father's grandma, my great-grandma. Even though this gene expresses, there's like variations in expression phenotypically, not everyone has the same. We'll get the major symptoms like the hypermobility and dysfunctions with joints and easily coming disconnected or dislocated and out of place and so on. But there's even cases of women needing the stomach being ruined during childbirth and permanently requiring a colostomy bag for the rest of your life. I mean, I just found this Reddit post. It was a person on the sub 2X chromosomes, and they were saying they fundamentally do not believe pregnancy is safe. And I could just read it out because this post got a lot of hits, and from a doctor who actually works in labor and delivery at a hospital somewhere. I work in labor and delivery. I have walked with thousands, if not tens of thousands of women who have delivered babies. Their bodies go through absolute torture. It is torture level pain to deliver a baby, even with an epidural. Contractions are excruciating. The process isn't safe. Only 100 years ago, it was routine, emphasized, for women to die in labor. This is not a safe process to go through. And you go through all of this while your back, hips, pelvis, and legs are already aching from the watermelon strapped to your stomach. I've seen women die, experience fourth-degree tears, who can't control their bowels. I've seen their uterus tear open and they bleed to death. I've seen women choke on their own vomit during labor. I cared for a healthy woman who went into full heart failure and needed a heart transplant after pregnancy. Women have died from strokes the day after delivery. I had a woman in the ICU on a ventilator for a month after having a pulmonary embolism at home. I've watched women scream at the top of their lungs for an hour and they can't even scream anymore. I've watched women seize and turn blue. I've watched a 15-year-old girl deliver her baby naturally because her mother went and signed the consent form for an epidural. And there we go again with that. Parental consent forms needed for the doctors, even for the use of an epidural. She needed to be punished. No woman deserves the punishment of childbirth as a consequence of their crime of having sex. We don't torture the most sick criminals this way. Why do we torture our women with childbirth they never wanted? That's just a perfect description of the bare bones physiological, anatomical facts of this miracle of birth thing. Another thing about Kentucky is, and I just saw this on the news, like 2/3 of our counties don't even have an OBGYN. They're basically called OBGYN deserts. There's nowhere to go to get prenatal care. There's nowhere to actually, in the counties, and some of these counties are rural and you have to travel several hours to, say, Louisville or Lexington to even deliver or have the delivery process carried out, or C-section if that is needed. So where's the hospital funding? Where's that gonna come from? Since we're gonna need even more of that. No. Our politicians are too busy passing a law trying to ban these gambling machines, but they're not really gambling machines. Really a big thing in the state is gambling and casinos are illegal, and there's these machines called gray machines where it's kind of like slot machines. It's blurring the line. We gotta take a tough stand on this. Of course, at the same time, we allow sports betting and keep betting in the horse races because that's not gambling at all. And isn't the Kentucky lottery scratch-off a form of gambling? You can waste away your savings and finances just as much as on buying scratch-off tickets every day at the gas station as you can if we had these slot machines legalized. with this very puritanical, the whole country is sort of, especially states like Kentucky, where we have the mega church, Southeast Christian, where I was dragged to as a kid, and I had a sermon against homosexuality and that being a sin, and people were all clapping, and this was 2012, maybe 2013, probably 2012. I was already not a Christian at the time, but I was still basically playing this fake it mask in front of my parents, concealing the fact that's like gays are committing sin and living with a person that of the opposite sex, if you're not married, that's a sin. And everyone's like, ah. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't do the fake shit of something I totally find ridiculous. In the first place, the ideal of sin in Christian theology, and the ideal that consensual sex between adults of the same gender would even be a sin if this thing existed, or be considered immoral or abominable or unethical, or something that we should really put our focus on. Some great moral tragedy and crime that needs to be condemned and raged against. Anyway, of course, they never give answers why something is a sin. It's just for something to be wrong, there has to be reasons for something to be wrong. There usually has to have a victim involved. There has to be a violation of another person's liberty, another person's rights. There has to be a imposition of suffering, pain of some kind on another. And that's not the case with any of the things they like to call the sexual sins. So why is it wrong? God says so. Well, why does God say so? This is the whole problem with divine command theory and objective morals from God. We have to get it from God. But there's no reasoning or logical syllogisms involved in how we deduce that something is wrong or unethical or problematic. It's just, it's wrong because it's wrong. Circular. Well, if God says it, then it's wrong. If God says it's wrong to two men and two women to have sex, it's wrong. But if God says it's okay to have slaves, and in Exodus 21, give instructions how to beat your slaves as long as they don't die before sunrise, then that's right. Oh, yeah. And that's what the Southern Baptists used for the defense of chattel slavery during the Civil War, and that's why there's the Southern Baptist Convention at all, because they split off from the other Baptists over the slavery issue. And yeah, the Bible is just a piece of horrific, ancient, primitive myths, and if you're going to look to that ancient Near Eastern text of desert tribes that practiced slavery and treated women as property and were basically worse than ISIS and the Taliban are now, then you can't really participate in secular, civilized, enlightened society. I've always, and then we had sermons about hell, of course, and though it wasn't as extreme and vicious and emotionally as some sort of Pentecostal or Baptist churches that really get into the burning aspect. This was a non-denominational church. But they're basically, to me, Baptist and all but name. They have a big vat of water and they have these revival type things where people come down and get baptized and dunked, and it's all come be saved. It's just like the Baptists, so I don't. Like, I've had this thought, and it's basically like Christians are, and Muslims, but I'm in America, so Christianity is the dominant, overarching major religion, so good Islam for the moment, but it equally applies. It's basically worse than Nazism. I'm referring to the view of hell. If you believe that eternal, and let's really measure this out or try to conceptualize this, infinity, basically the largest number you can conceive of, a Google, 1 to the 100 zeros, trillion, a gazillion, bazillion is still just a millisecond compared to infinity. An eternity of torture or torment or suffering is a just and reasonable form of punishment for not just sins, not just crimes, even though that's bad enough, but even mere unbelief in the God, in the presuppositions of the faith, warrants eternal torture, eternal conscious torment. But it's worse than any. This God and you, by extension, as a follower and truster and praising apologist for this God, are worse than a Nazi. Nazis killed people. They forced people to work. They caused immense suffering and pain and misery to millions of humans during the Second World War and the Holocaust. Stalin caused great suffering and pain and torture to the gulags and the NKVD and invasion of Poland and the Baltic states and so on. But none of that comes close to an eternity. I mean, the Nazis at Auschwitz would even, some had the dignity, the small level of moral dissonance, or at least not dissonance, but compassion to shoot the person in the head before throwing them in a pit in Auschwitz and burning them. But some were especially sadistic, and they did not even bother to shoot them. They threw them in the pit and burned them alive. Well, if you're a fundamentalist Pentecostal, and you truly, literally believe in this burning hell, or the Muslims, where your skin burns off and then Allah will regrow it so you can burn some more, and this happens for an indefinite, perpetual infinity, forever, everlasting, no chance of redemption or restoration allowed, no purgatory. Yes, this is worse than Nazis, because at least the victims of the Nazis died. Their suffering ended. They expired, and there was no more conscious suffering. But God extends this out forever, for no reason, seemingly. Despite being God, despite being the creator of the whole universe and having omnipotence, He really needs people who do not believe in His existence. The poetry of God having needs to begin with implies some kind of deficiency and lack, and under perfect being theology, if God is all perfect and God can't actually need anything. God is so above human psychology. This attempt to anthropomorphize with needs and wants is really, but all that aside, that's a whole other argument, but it's like, do these Christians really believe that? Because if they would, I'd challenge them. Say someone's, would they really, if some atheist, agnostic, scientist, biologist, Richard Dawkins, neuroscientist like Francis Crick or Christoph Koch, or a Buddhist or a Wiccan was walking by, or some college student, they think they deserve, since they're deserving of being tortured, but they go, hey, go, if I said, hey, go take that person and pour gasoline on them and set them on fire. Or if you believe in torment instead of torture, big difference there. Go keep them in solitary confinement, kidnap them, put them in a dark cellar room and confine them there. And like Guantanamo Bay sensory deprivation sort of thing. Would the Cristian do this? Could they do this intuitively, emotionally? They would actually have them. They would not be sociopathic, monstrous torturers. Their own empathy, their own moral intuition, and aversion to creating and causing suffering to someone else would prevent them. Of course, I give them the benefit of the doubt and say, no, they would never do this. But at the same time, they're saying, this being done to them by God for all eternity is completely justified and essential and necessary, and they get their just comeuppance. They contradict that with their own behavior. Then I was going to talk about how we're like the only, one of the last remaining states that doesn't have legal medical marijuana. I'm not talking about recreational, even marijuana for medicinal uses, for chronic pain syndromes, mental suffering, anxiety, PTSD, various uses which cannabis has been approved and used for these medicinal, palliative, health-related illnesses. No, not even that is allowed. We have a bill that even some Republicans support, but the head of the Republicans is blocking it, even though our Democrat governor, because I guess our Democratic governor at the time would sign it into law. But what are we best known for as a state? Exporting alcohol, specifically bourbon. The bourbon industry is huge here. And tobacco. Marijuana, the plant, is criminalized, but at the same time, the more addictive, the most destructive to health, the carcinogenic, tobacco, cigarettes, and hard liquor is completely legal. Causes way more deaths, way more accidents involving intoxicated driving, but now for some reason all the cops are against marijuana, and time there's some bill in some state about legalizing marijuana or just decriminalizing small amounts, who's always against it? Cops. I don't know if it's because they just get some kind of enjoyment off of arresting people and marijuana possession is arresting people for nonviolent drug offenses gives them a huge boner because they can exercise this authority, and they have psychology equivalent to the schoolyard bully and this dominance hierarchy. The intoxication, infatuation with the exercise of your state monopoly of force. So, but this also comes back to religion. It's whole mind-altering, consciousness-altering substances is, I mean, it was the women's Christian temperance movement that had a prohibition on alcohol passed, and these are the same types against maintaining the status of criminalization on marijuana and psychedelics like psilocybin mushrooms and LSD, and in the meantime, none of this is working because the fentanyl is still flowing in with record overdose levels. So, in our jail is a complete shithole overrun with fentanyl, and so obviously the war on drugs is an ever losing sort of endeavor. And piling people into prison who do not belong in prison. The hypocrisy of Biden and so on, one of the big tough-on crimers. We need to look at Russia's authoritarian, brutal regime, locking up Brittany Griner for hashish, 10 years in a penal colony for a pot. We put people in prison for pot for decades, especially African Americans, and crack cocaine. Biden was right there with Reagan supporting the redeclaration of the war on drugs and starting this and turning our prisons into gulags. Anyway, I guess that's about it for now. This video's going too long, and fuck Kentucky. I think this state is retarded.